everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Freedom Hub Working Group. I am your host, Jeff Kanter, along with my co-host, Charles Frohman. And we have some great sponsors we'll talk about. But first off, remember, we are the Entrepreneurial Disruptor location. We're the intersection where everyone's meeting in that regard. And also, we are recording these for posterity. So you'll be able to find them on the following channels if you're not registered. We send out a new registration each link, but this is our standardized registration link that you can sign up for these on an ongoing basis, and automatically every week you'll get a notice. But if you're busy and can't necessarily make it, these are the three places we post these every weekend. So come Monday morning, as an example, this Talk with David will be up here, and you can get on there and watch it, and any others that you'll find, and there's a wealth of really good ones in there. And as you can see, let me shift for 1 minute here before we jump into some of that. This is Freedom Hub's sponsorship, our location, a lot of stuff you'll find out of here. This is where is an example of the BitChute, and we're on YouTube and Brighteon, but these are all the videos that go back a long time already. You'll see there's some really fantastic stuff on here. And so you'll certainly enjoy David's when we get that one posted. Now, we are working with some sponsors a little bit, which has been interesting. We've been getting a lot of attraction to what we're up to. And so lo and behold, we've got some player in the CBD space, and they're offering some special discounts. This is as we've found to be, and why we're kind of vetting things, this is what we found to be the only bioactive product in the market space. And so it's a chance for you to test it out. We've got some great stuff. You can go to the site, and there's some great videos. And if you decide to pursue it, they've created a special link. Instead of getting a 5 or maybe 10%, they're giving a 15% discount. So it's quite good. So anyway, we'll get back to some of our players later on. But in the meantime, let's talk about where we're going to go today. So Charles, if you'll do the honors and give us a little intro as to the exciting conversation we're about to hear.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, David. We have a favorite topic of mine, Murray Rothbard. In my dive down the rabbit hole in the 90s, when I was a congressional Republican staffer on Capitol Hill, becoming libertarian because I saw government and cronyism as the source of each problem, I discovered ever more hardcore libertarian sources to help my education on being a better staffer, from Reason to Cato. And for a lot of folks, Rothbard is like the litmus test, the top-notch, hardcore, just total package. Many of us call him the best political philosopher of the 20th century, and I think David will tell you why. Not everyone agrees. He is controversial for a lot of libertarians. Some of the libertarians that we've had on our show purposely ignore him and emphasize others like Hayek or Friedman. That's okay. You know, every libertarian thinker deserves praise in some way, but I think we'll get a sense of why he's controversial tonight and so overpowering. And frankly, it's good timing because the senior fellow from Mises, David Gordon, who edits the Mises Review, is the author of The Essential Rothbard. And many of us suspect that this new normal that the powers that be are imposing on us for whatever reason is just not something we want. We really want folks not just to worry about the crisis of the day, but to get to essentials, fundamentals. And Rothbard has the biggest picture set of fundamentals out there. So that's my introduction, Jeff.
All right, very good. Well, David, let's see what you have to bring to the conversation. This is going to be pretty exciting, so I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, Charles, for that very kind introduction. It was such a good introduction. I'm afraid that anything else will be an anticlimax, but that's the risk we take. Can everybody hear me all right?
Be just a little louder if possible.
Okay. Yes, I say, can everybody hear me all right? I tend to have a very low voice. I'm some people are hard of hearing. I'm hard of hearing, but I'm also hard of speaking. I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you about Murray Rothbard. I met Murray Rothbard in March 1979, but I've been acquainted with his work ever since as a student in junior high school. I read Man, Economy, and State when it came out toward the end of 1962. That was a long time ago. What I want to try to do in the brief time we have for my talk is just to go over some of the points that I think are essential in understanding Rothbard. And if there are topics I don't cover, perhaps you'll be able to ask me about those in the question period. I want to start with a little bit about Rothbard's political philosophy, which Charles mentioned in his introduction. Rothbard starts from a fundamental principle, which we find in John Locke, is that human beings are self-owners. What do we mean when we say that someone is a self-owner? It means that essential decisions about a person should be made by that person. For example, whether you choose to take certain drugs or whether you want to, say, undergo certain medical procedures, or what employment you were in, what job you want. This should be decided by you and not from other people. What we're doing in self-ownership is essentially generalizing when we say that slavery is wrong. It's wrong for people to be under the control of someone else. Say, we wouldn't want it to be the case that somebody else is deciding where we have to work or whom we should marry or not marry. That it should be up to us, provided, of course, we respect the self-ownership rights of other people. This, as I say, is found in Locke in just that language, self-ownership. And Rothbard takes this as something that's evident, that this is a good starting point for political philosophy. So we start with self-ownership, and then we ask what follows from that. Now, before going on, let me just clear up a few misunderstandings that over the many years that I've been thinking about Rothbard and talking to him with students have come up. One is, when we talk about self-ownership, the right of each person to have control over basic decisions about that person, and it shouldn't be that someone else decides these fundamental points for the person. It isn't only that a particular person or group of people other than that person himself should make these decisions. There are some people who think, well, of course, slavery is wrong, but somehow if we have a society in which there's a democracy, somehow the majority rule makes this all right. If the majority decides that you should have a certain job, even if you don't want to take that job, then they're able to, you have to work there. Say the majority took account of your objections, but they overruled you, so you have to do that. Rothbard, following Herbert Spencer and others, doesn't accept that. He says self-ownership applies not only to particular individuals telling you what to do, but also to democracy, where the claim is the majority, the whole society is telling you what to do. Still, you have the right to make these decisions for yourself. Now, another point that very often comes up is some people don't like the term self-ownership. They say, oh, well, doesn't this imply somehow that there's a separation between yourself and your body or the rest of you? It's somehow the self shouldn't be conceived of as something apart from the human being. You are yourself. It isn't that yourself is owning the rest of you or the whole of you, but you are yourself. So if you are yourself, how can you be said to own yourself? I don't think this objection is a very good one because the term would be something like self-respect or self-confidence. It's a reflexive term. It doesn't imply any sort of separation. And in any event, the term is one that we've introduced. Some people act as if when we're talking about self-ownership, there's some sort of essence of the term. Some people say, well, this isn't a proper use of self-ownership. The proper use is such and such. But if this is, why should we think there are these fixed essences of the term that require us to speak in a certain way? This is what it is. I should say also, there are some people who say, oh, well, we should talk not about self-ownership, but ownership of the body. I don't think this is a good point either, because I suppose, say, there was some way we could tap into people's minds without, say, we could get them while they're sleeping, we could get some sort of machine that would record, use their minds somehow in projects that we wanted. One might plausibly contend that that would violate the self-ownership rights of the person, even though it wouldn't be interfering with the person's body or the use of the person's body. I think Stefan Kinsella is one who prefers to talk about ownership of the body. I think for him, he thinks this makes it easier to oppose intellectual property, which is one of his consuming interests. But regardless of whether it does or not, I see no reason to avoid self-ownership and not talk about ownership of the body instead. Now, before turning from self-ownership to a different topic, I should say it's much more important that we accept self-ownership, that we see that this is a plausible starting point, than to require that people accept some sort of particular philosophical grounding for self-ownership. There's some people, say, who have devotees of the Hans Hermann Hoppe's argumentation ethics, or there are others who have a kind of a Randian justification for self-ownership, at least something like self-ownership. But I think, and Rothbard himself had an Aristotelian argument in favor of self-ownership, but I think for understanding Rothbardian philosophy, political philosophy, it's much more important we accept self-ownership and not concentrate so much on what is the basis for it. One of the strengths of Rothbard's position is he thought that there could be various reasons people had for accepting self-ownership. So as long as you accepted it, that was fine with him. Isn't that you have to have a particular reason for it. All right, so you'll be glad to know I'm going to turn from self-ownership to something else. And this is what happens once we do accept that each person owns himself or herself. Then we have this question. Human beings find themselves on Earth, and they have natural resources of various kinds. How, if at all, can people acquire these resources? How do they get to use them? And Rothbard, again, following Locke, favored a view that we acquire unowned resources by doing something to the resources that makes them, by doing this, they're not owned. So by doing this, in Locke's phrase, mixing your labor with them, you acquire them. Not much turns on what exactly the phrase mixing your labor with involves, but it's somehow you stake out a claim to certain unowned resources, and then by doing that, you acquire them as your property. So if that's the case, that, according to Rothbard, explains the origin of property title. And then once you have that, this can be passed on by inheritance or gift to other people, and you can engage in trade, exchange with other people to so that you can acquire goods and services in that way. It's not just what you originally owned or passed on to your descendants, but you can acquire them through trade. Now, there's an unstated premise in Rothbard's argument that one political philosopher, Marxist political philosopher, G.A. Cohen, raised to this sort of theory. He didn't specifically have Rothbard in mind. He was thinking more of Robert Nozick, who was a very famous academic libertarian political philosopher. But his criticism would certainly apply to Rothbard. What he says is, why should we assume that natural resources starts off unowned? What if, say, you assume everybody is born with equal shares to all of the natural resources in existence? But I think we could say in response to this that it seems a very plausible assumption that resources are unowned if we had a system in which everybody is supposed to own everything to start with. We would have very great difficulties of anybody doing anything, because you'd have to get everybody's permission before you could use any resources. And then whenever you had new people arriving, would there have to be a reallocation of the property shares? So this system wouldn't really work out. I should say that one thing about Cohen, whom I knew slightly, was even if you disagree with his political philosophy, he had some very good jokes, and we can appreciate him for that, if not for this objection. All right, so this is the self-ownership plus acquisition of property is the basic framework of Rothbard's political system. But this by itself doesn't tell us what sort of economic system we should have. And here, because supposing we start off with individuals who are property owners in the way self-owners acquire property, like I've explained, that doesn't tell us what sort of economic system they should have. What if it turned out that, say, socialism, by which I mean centrally directed ownership of the means of production, was the most efficient possible system? Then everybody would presumably agree to establish socialism. But of course, Rothbard didn't think that was the case. In fact, he agreed with the argument of his great teacher, Ludwig von Mises, that socialism is really an impossible system. You can't have economic calculation under socialism. Under the conditions of a developed modern economy, socialism would totally break down, wouldn't work at all. And in fact, he argued most extensively in Man, Economy, and State, this great work of 1962, that under a system of complete free market, then this would be the most economically productive system. People would be able to, through the division of labor, they would be able to, social cooperation, the possibilities of people achieving prosperity through peaceful cooperation would greatly exceed that of any other possible economic arrangement. And here again, he followed and extended the arguments of Ludwig von Mises, especially in Mises' great treatise of 1949, Human Action. So, and he tried to show in Man, Economy, and State, and also in the book Power and Market, which was originally intended as part of Man, Economy, and State, and was published separately, that all types of government intervention fail. For example, you consider them in elaborate detail, progressive taxation, any kind of taxation, minimum wage laws, any kind of interventionist measure, we argue, wouldn't work. So, then we start off then with self-ownership, individual property owners, and then they establish the free market. Now, there is, I think, a rather important difference between the way Murray Rothbard argued for the free market and the way Ludwig von Mises did. And I want to go into that a little bit. According to Mises, Mises didn't accept individual rights as something thought that people should have legal rights to property, but he didn't believe in natural rights or moral rights apart from society. So according to Mises, we could show purely by scientific arguments that, say, minimum wage laws don't work. They don't raise the wages of workers without causing unemployment. So according to Mises, we don't need any value judgments to show that the market, free market, is the most productive system. this is a purely value neutral claim, and we don't need any kind of ethical system. We just say people in fact want peace and prosperity. Here's the way we get it. So that's why we should have a free market. Rothbard didn't agree with that. He thought what Mises says is all right as far as it goes, but somebody could coherently reject that and say, well, I think that my individual gains from intervention are more important to me than what promotes general prosperity, so I'm going to favor that. So Rothbard says if we want to refute that, we need this comprehensive view of ethics. So that was one area in which Mises and Rothbard were different. Now, there's another area in which Mises and Rothbard differed, and this returns us to political philosophy. Mises believed that although there should be a free market, we still need a state to define and enforce property rights. Rothbard didn't agree with that. He thought that individuals didn't need the state. The enforcement of property rights, definition of property right, could be handled exclusively by private individuals, and this could be justice, defense, and protection would be market goods just like other market goods. So this is a basic difference between them. Now, I see we're running out of time, so what I want to conclude with is a discussion of how Murray Rothbard applied his political philosophy to a particular very important issue, and this is foreign policy, especially American foreign policy. Rothbard had the view not only do we not need a state, but the state is evil, that the actually existing state is really an oppressive gang of criminals, and we should reduce its scope and power as much as possible. So in foreign policy, he favored almost complete non-intervention. He wasn't a pacifist, but in his way of thinking, wars would almost never be justifiable. Perhaps one could make an exception if it was a direct invasion and people voluntarily wanted to oppose that invasion. But he saw no use for the state at all. So in foreign policy, he favored very much disarmament, not confronting other nations. And during the Cold War, that's to say, the conflict between the United States and Soviet Russia, it started after World War II and continued till the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. This was a very controversial position, and there were many people on the right wing who Rothbard was for most of his career associated more with conservative movements than left-wing movements, although not always. So this was an unpopular position. It got him, that had a famous conflict with William Buckley's National Review over this matter. It was an extremely important issue for him. So these are a few of the important issues involving Murray Rothbard and his political philosophy. So I think I'll stop now and we can have questions or objections.
Okay, very good.
I should say I like objections. Objections are always a lot of fun trying to see if I could answer. I used to be able to answer objections pretty well, but I'm senile now, but I still like to do it.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can get a few coming your way. I've got some hands up for sure. So this is Jeff, and I was just going to ask you real quick, as you see and as you've studied this and look at the career Murray had and stuff, what's sort of happening at the moment? How do we get to such a disconnected place as we seem to be today? And what does that mean? Is that like we're at a tipping point, or it's kind of like a cornered rat and we're about to go a different direction and everyone's holding on for dear life for this other way, or what's going on?
Well, I would say from a Rothbardian point of view, the problem is people have ignored the way he thought about things. They've adopted other solutions, and we find increasingly since he died in 1995, January 1995, there's been an accelerating trend against the type of political philosophy he favored. One might have thought that with the end of the Cold War, this would lead to a more peaceful policy, but this hasn't happened, and we've seen various developments in the United States, various kinds of political correctness and such that have imposed a kind of thought control on America. So I think, I don't know why people have not found persuasively Rothbardian way of looking at things. I think a good deal of it could be control of the media by academic institutions, by people with vested interests against his sort of ideas. But there has been an accelerating movement against libertarian thought of his kind, although he is finding, I think I'm encouraged that I see students coming to the Mises Institute. He does have a following, and I hope this will increase in the time we have left to us, assuming we're not all destroyed by COVID-19.
All right. Well, I see, David, you have your hand up.
David, I am aware that Rothbard had a difficult relationship at times with the Libertarian Party. I'm also aware that he was part of the first iteration of the Libertarian Party Radical Caucus back in the 1970s. What was Murray's position on the political direction taken by the Libertarian Party soon after its creation, contrary to David Nolan's perception of the Libertarian Party as a flag for freedom folks to rally around instead of a political machine?
Oh yes, well, at the time of the Radical Caucus, which would be around 1970, starting around 1978 or 79, Murray Rothbard was working for the Cato Institute, which was funded by Charles Koch. And the view that the Cato Institute had, which was a set that Koch and the head of the institute, Ed Crane, was that libertarianism should advertise itself as kind of like it was called low tax liberalism. So it should, in order to appeal to a large number of people, it shouldn't fundamentally challenge the existing nature of the state. It should say something like, well, we don't want to abolish the welfare state, but we should reduce the number of programs, and we don't want to end taxation. We should reduce taxes and limit American military involvement overseas rather than ending it. And Murray Rothbard didn't, as you can imagine, didn't like that very much. This led to this culminating the fight over the candidacy of Ed Clark, the president of the Libertarian Party ticket in 1980. And this led to Rothbard's break with the Cato Institute. Now, as the LP developed in the 1980s, Murray Rothbard favored there was a lot of factions within the party, and Rothbard favored particular groups and factions within the party. And he felt that the party was becoming increasingly dominated by people who had very little regard for them, called space cadets, and were not very serious people. And this led eventually to, around 1989 or so, to his total break with the Libertarian Party. In the last few years of his life, he was associated with what was called the Paleo Alliance, which was an alliance between a group of libertarians who had conservative social values and a group of conservatives who rejected the interventionist views of the neoconservatives. So that lasted for a few years until there were tensions within that alliance also. But that was where Murray ended up in the last few years of his life.
Sounds like a lot of libertarians getting together, in other words. So there you go. Sounds about par for the course. Charles, I see you got your hand up.
Sure, and thanks, Dave. When you answer this, if you can maybe lean a little closer to your computer, it may help us pick up your voice a little more. We have had a lot of wide-ranging libertarian guests on this webinar over the past couple of years. A couple criticisms of Rothbard for your response. Phil Chittister with Free to Choose, who produced Milton Friedman's famous series in 1980, which helped elect Ronald Reagan, said Friedman was somewhat turned off by Rothbard. And, you know, for those of us in the movement, we want everyone to get along because most of us probably believe there are many paths to liberty. But, you know, it's inevitable that the leaders sometimes clash. If you could comment, number one, on that, Milton Friedman, Rothbard, what you know about that. Number two, Steve Horowitz recently on an Austrian economics update, as most of the Austrian economists professors do, you know, highlighted Hayek and a few others and downplayed Rothbard. So those two internecine conflicts, Milton Friedman versus Rothbard and the mainstream Austrian economists versus Rothbard.
Oh yes, well, on Milton Friedman, it's certainly the case that the two of them didn't get along, but one shouldn't say, I think, oh, well, this shows how terrible Rothbard is because he insisted everyone has to do things his way and he didn't want to cooperate with anyone who held other views, because Friedman had extremely negative views on Rothbard. It wasn't a case where we have this man, Milton Friedman, who was a great defender of the free market, and then here's Rothbard coming in and saying, oh, you're not extreme enough, you'll have to go. Friedman was extremely critical of Rothbard. He was also very critical of Ludwig von Mises. So also, from Rothbard wrote about Milton Friedman. He felt that although Friedman had many good points favoring opposing government intervention in various programs, he was very good, say, on opposing minimum wage laws. He didn't defend a libertarian system in the full sense at all. He supported, he was a very strong supporter of the Vietnam War in spite of his good work in opposing conscription. He favored a monetary system that, from Rothbard's point of view, was highly interventionist. So, from Rothbard's point of view, Milton Friedman was someone who didn't go far enough, and he would probably agree with Aaron Director at University of Chicago, who sometimes referred to Milton Friedman as my pro-New Deal brother-in-law. Remember, it was Friedman who really helped devise the withholding tax in World War II. Now, on Steve Horowitz's point, on Hayek was certainly an important one of the great economists. I should say Hayek was a teacher of mine, but again, he made very important contributions to Austrian economics, but he was not a real libertarian at all. If you look at Constitution of Liberty, his book, that he allows a great deal of government intervention in the economy, various government provision of medical care. He even is very critical of the Supreme Court for overturning too many of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal measures. So Rothbard had a great deal of respect for Hayek, unlike, didn't have so much respect for Milton Friedman, but he thought that Hayek hadn't gone far enough in defending a free market order. I should say in that position, Ludwig von Mises agreed with Rothbard that Hayek had too many compromises. Hayek wrote a review, Mises wrote a review of Constitutional Liberty where he made points about the book very similar to those that Rothbard raised in a memo that he wrote about Constitutional Liberty, a manuscript of Constitutional Liberty that he did for the William Volcker Fund, which he worked for.
Charles, I think you had a follow-up there.
Actually, Jeff, I might invite some of our participants to ask a question. For example, Dr. Singleton with the AAPS might ask about Murray Rothbard's views on healthcare. Dr. Singleton, are you there?
Oh, yes. Hi. I just unmuted myself. Well, you basically asked the question, and we're certainly at a turning point now where COVID-19 has given all sorts of folks the opportunity to institute governmental controls. And some of the relinquishing of some regulations is very good, but it also just opens the door to this public health emergency as the justification for usurping all of our liberties. So where are you in this? What can we do in healthcare to make sure what little control we have left and what Jeff and Charles are trying to do can keep moving forward, in this age of over-regulation, really?
Oh yes, well, of course, Rothbard didn't have to confront COVID-19, but he did take the view that individuals can decide how to deal with these problems on their own without involving the government. He does in Ethics of Liberty raise this question. He said, well, we could imagine a situation where somebody had, let's say, some sort of a typhoid Mary who would just automatically kill anyone who came in contact with her because of some illness that she had. So he thought in such a case, quarantining the person would be justifiable. But if it were a case rather of someone who just raised the risk of somebody else having some sort of injury, then that wouldn't justify the government in restricting the person. Say in the COVID-19 situation, as I understand matters, which is not very well, this the situation is if someone gets the infection, there's some chance the person could pass it on to others, and then once you get it, then there is some chance, not very much, depending on your age group and other factors, that you'll die from it or be seriously injured, or your health will suffer. So I would say Rothbard had very strong views on risk not justifying government intervention. So I would certainly think he would oppose the compulsory restrictions that, in his view, it would be up to individuals to decide how they wanted to deal with the situation as they themselves assess the costs and benefits of the various alternatives. One thing comes out in his work on economic history would be I think it's quite important, is that suppose somebody said, people don't really know how to deal with these matters, they're not experts in the matter, so we need experts to guide us. Rothbard would certainly question, why should we assume that government experts are acting in our interests rather than the interests or other interests of the people who hire them? He pointed out that individuals who lack expert guidance can seek out authorities whom they trust, and they're much more likely to get better advice that way than if they rely on government officials to solve these problems for them.
All right.
I don't want to say it's interesting you bring up experts, since certainly our experts have shown themselves to be thoroughly inconsistent and making us wonder what their special interests or motivations are. So I thank you for your answer.
It was very good. Actually, we have a little bit of an interesting treat today. We have a guest here from China, and I maybe can put her on the spot because maybe she's got a question you might want to ask David. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Yeah, I was going to see maybe you might have an interesting question you had for David.
I have a question concern about China. So
okay.
I would like to know what Rothbard's view about the dispute about the intellectual property right between China and the U.S. Because the U.S. The government think China has stealed intellectual property from the U.S. So what's Rothbard's view about this?
As well, Rothbard was generally suspicious of intellectual property, especially on patents. He thought copyright books were all right, but he didn't accept patents. So he wouldn't think that the Chinese are doing anything wrong if they take over American intellectual property. I don't think he wrote on that specifically, but he was in general quite critical that he didn't, for him, it wasn't as fundamental an issue as it is, say, for Stefan Kinsella, for whom it seems to be, if not a central issue, pretty close to it. But in general, Rothbard wasn't in favor of intellectual property, so he wouldn't regarded these complaints as significant. And in any case, supposing you said, oh, well, there's more to it than that, or maybe there is something to these complaints, he would think that shouldn't get in the way of free trade between the U.S. and China. That was just as, say, government subsidies of various products shouldn't interfere with trade. There's some people say, well, we favor free trade, but only under fair conditions. It's unfair, say, that American companies should have to compete against firms that are subsidized by the Chinese government. Rothbard wouldn't agree with that. He'd say we need complete free trade, regardless of what either the Chinese or the U.S. government is doing otherwise.
Okay. Charles, we got time to squeeze in one last question here.
Well, I was going to invite another participant, Doug
then go for it.
Bandel,
Oh, there you go.
to maybe ask a question on foreign policy if he's still there and wants to. Otherwise, we can make up another question.
Why don't you make up a question? I'm happy listening.
Fantastic. What is the one book, David, sorry.
Hello? I can't hear you.
Charles, got there. There you go. Unmute yourself.
What is the one book that we might buy to really get the essence of Rothbard?
Let me see. That's a difficult choice. I would say if you get the volume called Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature and Other Essays, that would be a very good one to give you a kind of a sense of Rothbard's views on all sorts of issues.
And maybe your book too?
Oh yeah, yes. Well, I can't object to anybody reading my book. They have critical comments, but otherwise it's fine.
Very good.